Well, the panel's coming up. For those of you that are first-time attendees, our winter symposium that we do for the Army has been going on for a number of years, even before General Sullivan took the helm. As it has evolved, it has turned out to be a shared event between Army Materiel Command, AMC, and TRADOC. The two commanders participate in development of the agenda. They swing from one year to the next as to who the lead is. This year, General Dunwoody and her command have the lead in a very strong supporting role. Is General Cone and his team. If you've noticed this year, we have introduced some new players who have turned out to be very strong participants. This is the first time, in addition to our aviation symposium, that we've been blessed to have members from industry, members from academia, and members from federally funded research and development centers and think tanks. General Sullivan and I believe this has put new oomph into it. There was not a lack of oomph in before. So you've seen that already. And when you look across the table here, you'll see some very distinguished scholars and thinkers who do not belong to the government. I wanted to be the moderator on this panel because simply General Sullivan and I have been through this road before. Happenstance, we came into Washington on the same day. It was probably a dark day, but we didn't know each other. But then we along with General Bono, commenced not only they taking the Army to war, but looking at downsizing the Army. And the downsizing was traumatic. It involved people, but there was also a procurement holiday. The current administration has said there is going to be no procurement holiday. What they don't say in the footnote is there's going to be a scarcity of dollars. So as the Army looks across those functions of DOTMLPF, the challenge for, particularly for TRADOC, as the architect of the Army, and then also for the G8 function as the Army, is, okay, how do we get it right? So we have no pause, and that we're trained and ready to go out the door anytime anything happens as you look towards 2020, because 2020 is the year that the chief has put out there as the target post. The panel today is particularly focused on an investment strategy, not the investment strategy, but a discussion on that, of how we continue to have modernization across all three components, active, guard, and reserve, as the investment dollars drop. So you'll hear that from these gentlemen in uniform. You may not hear contrarian opinions from our three civilian experts, but they'll give you a different view. So the way we're going to run this, I'm going to get off the stage to a big round of applause. And thank you. You really wanted me to leave. And I'll turn it over to the panel, and then I'll pick up at question time of orchestrating the questions that come along. So, General Walker, over to you. You're in charge.
General Stroop, thanks. And thank you to AUSA for hosting this. This is a really important topic, and I'd like to give a 5-minute brief intro on the broader topic of Army investment strategy. As you know, the nation's facing significant economic and budget challenges, and the Army is going to be part of the solution as our nation addresses this. We've recently received the Department of Defense guidance on sustaining U.S. global leadership priorities for 21st century defense. We've received the Defense Budget Priorities and Choices for Strategic Guidance. And these shift us from an emphasis on the current warfight to preparing for future challenges, advancing the Department's effort to rebalance, reform, and support our various national security imperatives through lower spending. After a decade of large defense expenditures, including Overseas Contingency Funds, or OCO, our reality is a reduction in budgets and Army in strength while we maintain readiness. So, as Winston Churchill once so elegantly stated, gentlemen, we have run out of money, now it is time to think. So returning to smaller instincts and budgets, though, is not new. It's in fact a historical norm following periods of warfighting. And the good news is we emerge from this decade of warfighting with an Army that's well accomplished, battle tested, all volunteer, and led by some highly experienced and dedicated leaders. As we transition to a smaller and leaner force, we've got to develop an investment strategy for the Army of 2020 that preserves and improves upon the best qualities that we forged during this extended combat operations. An investment strategy that retains and builds on our operational lessons learned and develops new capabilities and exploits the human dimension, our technological, joint, and network advantages. But this is not about additional money. It's about readiness. It's about taking our investment strategy, it's about taking our environment into account, improving the way we invest in what we have. So investment strategy is about investment in our soldiers. And this investment in modernization is more than just investment in new equipment. It's about our investment about the full, all DOTMLPF domains. It's critical so that if the nation ever calls us again, we're ready. Now, not too long ago, we were asked the question, how would we implement reversibility and expansibility? And I was familiar with the term expansibility. My recollection was that's during the 90s, that's how we thought about how we would expand the Army if needed. Reversibility, I had to think about, and fortunately TRADOC has some good thinkers. So this is how we've evolved. Basically, reversibility is everything we do now to ensure that the Army can expand when called upon. It requires us to make some selected investments and put some policies in place to make sure that we can expand when needed. And then expansibility is the ability of the Army to grow capabilities and capacity that's not resident. Now, these ideas are good ones. However, the Army is not reversible. We've got to be smart in how we invest now and able to continue readiness and expansion when needed. So, one aspect of improving our investment strategy is recognizing that modernization includes more than just equipment. It's across the DOTMLPF. I wanted to give you some examples in each of the domains. For doctrine and leader development, for example, and Dave Perkins will talk to you about this, but we are pursuing Doctrine 2015 effort and building the Army profession in our leader development programs. Organization, we're looking really hard at our force design and force mix, balancing what we've learned in the last 10 years of war to our new emerging future expected threats. For training, our home station training and immersive training will become central to maintaining force readiness, and those investments are central to the future force. For personnel, if we're to be able to expand the Army when needed, we must have mid-grade leaders around which we can grow battalions. So we have to look at our current manning policies. One policy adjustment I think we'll see is return of mid-grade leaders throughout the institutional force. We'll need to keep our mobilization training facilities on our installations fully supported, so that we have to reorganize, regenerate, or expand, we can do that. And we still do material. Equipment modernization remains important, and we have learned and implemented some very important lessons on how to do that better. So as we look at the Army of 2020, I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the issues that Training and Doctrine Command is working, and more in my concepts and capability world in ARCIC. Many parts of those are part of this investment strategy. So we have a campaign of learning. Our campaign of learning is a coordinated series of war games, experiments, studies. It's designed to critically examine the threat, the environment, and ourselves, and to inform our concept development. We're blessed that we have lots of private subject matter experts, the other services, OSD, think tanks, the joint world that help us do that. So it's just not a bunch of Army guys and gals sitting in a room looking at ourselves. We're reviewing our capability needs assessment process. Our capability needs assessment is our process where we take, if we've got to use these concepts, what capabilities does the force have to execute those concepts, and what are our shortfalls? And so what we are going to do is ensure that we have one prioritized list of capability gaps and prioritized solutions across the DOTMLPF, again, more than just material, and that list is recognized throughout the Army, OSD, the Joint World, and Industry as the single reference. We are weighing heavily on integrated capability development teams in the requirements process, and this is pulling in all the stakeholders, so we don't just have combat developers, again, sitting in a room all by themselves. It pulls in folks from the acquisition world, from the research and development world, costers, pricers, engineers, folks in the Army staff as appropriate, so we have all the more stakeholders present and earlier in the development process of requirements. We're writing those requirements differently. We're trying to write them with a more open architecture so we don't paint ourselves in a corner. We are working to be more willing to change requirements along with the testers, users, and our acquisition partners. Rapid acquisition. You know, rapid acquisition has been a great success over the last 10 years. We developed it because our system wasn't responsive enough. So the good news is we get capabilities in the hands of soldiers rapidly. It saves lives. It helps us accomplish the mission better. But the bad news about rapid acquisition solutions is that we don't necessarily get the training done before we get it in the hands of soldiers that we'd like, and we don't have life cycle sustainment costs for those. So as the budgets come down, how do we retain the best of the rapid acquisition processes that we have developed so they are there in the force, so should we need to expand that we have those. So we're working that one hard too. In the world of combat developers in our centers of excellence, over the years, the presence of engineers, pricers, costers, analysts, operations analysts, force managers, acquisition experts. We've gotten out of whack in terms of having the right people present so that early in the process of developing requirements, I'm exaggerating a bit here, but that you come up with a requirement that does not defy the laws of physics, that you come up with a requirement that is well resource informed. So we are working with our centers of excellence to take a look at what are the real needs of our capability developers so we can replace some of these skill sets back in the combat development world to better develop requirements. Analysis of alternatives, a couple initiatives that I think we'll see in the future. We're working a rather dynamic analysis of alternatives in the ground combat vehicle program with regard to non-developmental vehicles. And so at Fort Bliss during this NIE this spring, you'll see several vehicles, and it's the participation of those vehicles is designed to inform our requirements. And did we get our requirements right? And by putting those with soldiers in the field, we believe we can better do that. So that's an example of something we're doing differently. The Vice Chief of Staff's capability portfolio reviews means that instead of looking at individual systems, we're looking at families of capabilities holistically. That helps eliminate redundancy, another good initiative. And I'll stop there. The point is, there are lots of initiatives we're undertaking to help us in the capability development world with the Army investment strategy. So we're not out of money, but we are going to have less in the future compared to what we had in the last decade, so we have to think, integrate, collaborate, and keep thinking. So I hope this quick overview of the emerging Army 2020 investment strategy will stimulate plenty of dialogue this morning, and I'd like to pass it over to my partner, General Dave Perkins at the Combined Arms Center's Commanding General.
All right. Thanks, Keith. Well, as Keith said, I'll sort of continue on with this theme of investment, but what I want to focus on is a particular type of investment, and as General Sullivan has continually reminded me throughout my career, the Army is people. And that is the strength of our Army, and that is one of the things that we focus primarily on at CAC as we partner with the rest of the folks in the Army, is our investment in people and our leader development. And how do we develop our leaders? What skill sets do we want them to have? What values do we want them to have? So that regardless of what type equipment or what type of organization we put them in, they are going to ensure victory. Now, there have been various panels, and it may even come up here today. People want to know, what is the future going to look like? Would define the hybrid threat? What's the enemy going to look like, et cetera, like that, you know, in 2015 or 2020. And I think most of us would agree. The one thing that we've been able to do with great rapidity is generally be able to determine where we are going to go to war next wrong. And that happens quite often. And so, again, good discussions to have. You kind of have to have an idea of the enemy, but I think we would all agree as we move forward, it becomes more and more ambiguous. And I remember from my tactics instruction as a lieutenant at Fort Knox that the more unknown the enemy, the more unknown the environment, the bigger the reserve you have to have. Well, from my experience, the reserve that we have in the Army to deal with unknown are well-trained leaders, well-trained soldiers, and a well-disciplined force. That is our strategic reserve, our well-developed leaders to be able to deal with whatever enemy that we have been unable to predict that we put them up against. And the enemy goes to school on us quite well, and in my experience is whatever the U.S. Army decides we are going to be good at, that is what the enemy will not fight us at, and they will fight us at something that they think we are not good at, and therefore we are going to rely upon our leaders to be able to deal with that. And so as we are looking at our leader development, whether it starts through their commissioning sources and their basic courses, Captain's Career Corps, CGSC on the way up, we are trying to make sure that we develop these agile and aggressive leaders that make decisions and lead formations in a values-based organization. And I got to tell you that, you know, as historically as we've come out of periods of conflict, people throw around the term sort of a peace dividend. And that's kind of code for, well, we used to give the Army a lot of money, and now you don't need as much money, so we're going to take this extra money and we're going to spend it someplace else. But I prefer to think that where we are in the Army right now is not dealing with a peace dividend, but we have a war dividend. And that war dividend is the dividend we have of all the experience of our battle-tested soldiers and leaders out there. And so it's not how do we capture the peace dividend and spend it someplace else, but how do we capture that war dividend and reinvest it in the Army. So we have to reinvest this war dividend that we have after multiple years of conflict, reinvest it in the Army and make sure our Army is even better as we go forward to what we would all agree is a very unknown future. And so as Keith said, as we buy software and we want an open framework software, that's kind of what we want with our leaders as well, is that they are a learning leader and a learning organization, and that they can plug into just about any kind of other situation out there and be able to change their software with a basis that they operate from, a values-based and a doctrine-based Army to deal with these unknown situations. So to do that, we are in the process, as Keith said, plan right now to Doctrine 2015, rewrite all of Army doctrine by 2015. It will be a hierarchical doctrine with our 15 base documents. It'll only be about 10 pages long or so, and then we'll have 14 other ones under that, only about 100 pages. So, and then we eventually will get down to the part of the doctrine that will change rapidly: tactics, techniques, and procedures. There'll be a Wikimedia portion of it. There'll be a QA, QC portion of it. So these TTPs that evolve very quickly, we can bring those into the force, get them into the schools, get them into lessons learned. But as you go higher up the doctrine, that is more universal, and it is more universal across the various spectrums that we find ourselves in. And I will tell you, it's reassuring as I go around to our advanced courses and the CGSC and all that, that as I talk to the students, they grasp for that. They want a foundational basis to what they do. And when we start laying out this approach to doctrine, they realize that that is what has made our Army strong, and it is something that will prepare us sort of for the unknown future. You know, we talked about training, and a lot of you are involved in that out there. It's interesting, recently as a division commander in Iraq, I would go around battlefield circulation, you go in an infantry battalion and say, how many of you came in the Army, or how many of you were in the Army before 9/11? And in an infantry battalion, I got to tell you, it's the battalion commander, maybe the sergeant major, or a few folks like that, but the vast majority have been in since 9/11. So they've been in this back-to-back deployment cycle. And so I start giving an update. Well, you know, we're going to go to 2-to-1, maybe 3-to-1, dwell, bog, et cetera, like that. And universally, you know, I'd get some young sergeant or soldier raise their hand and say, hey, sir, what would we possibly do for 2 years at Fort Carson? I mean, there's not 2 years worth of stuff to do in the Army. Because I've been growing up, and usually between 9 and 12 months, I'm good to go when I'm back to Iraq, Afghanistan. And so they kind of don't know what they don't know. And so you kind of start explaining the wide breadth of things that we need our Army formations to be trained on and how we get at them. And it gets back to the home station training that Keith talked about. How do we challenge our soldiers and leaders at home station training to get at all of these things? And how do we do it in a sustainable manner? How do we do it in a manner that is easily replicable throughout the force, and in a way that captures their attention? Because I can tell you that they are very thirsty for it. And so when we bring them into the schoolhouse and we start teaching about Army training management and supply discipline and things like that, I can tell you it's not a hard sell. They understand that it is something that they need to know. They are aggressive about finding out about it. And so as we move forward, again, we are focusing on what are those things that our leaders need to know, what are the skill sets they have to have, and how do we get it throughout our formations such they will have that agility, initiative, and capacity to deal with that unknown future that we are going to be throwing them into. And so we are looking at broadening experiences. You know, it's interesting what we would consider a broadening experience. Most of our young captains think is business as usual, working with interagency partners, State Departments, civilian organizations, coalition partners. That's what they've grown up in. And so we're have a very broad outreach to those groups, that as we school our soldiers and young leaders, we incorporate that into their schooling. We partner with those organizations. We are looking at creating additional capability at our School of Advanced Military Studies, where we can actually have multiple assignments and then back in, resulting in PhD levels of schooling and awarding of those degrees, and building in this capacity to deal with the unknown and challenge our leaders. So to the sort of the assembled masses out there that deal with this, and Keith has brought up multiple times, sort of the DOTMLPF integration, sometimes we do get a little bit focused on the material part of it because it drives budgets, it drives POM cycles and things like that. But again, from a leader development point of view, I think a lot of us realize that's where our key to success is. And as we develop these solutions for the future, we are focusing very heavily at CAC on making sure the leader development part of it is not only trying to catch up with it, but in fact is leading that effort out there. And the good news is, I can tell you, our young soldiers, sergeants and captains up there, they are more than well prepared for that, and that is how they look at problems. Quite honestly, they look at it from a leader challenge point of view, and then how do I take the tools that the Army gives me and solve the problem that I've already sort of defined and try to come up with as a solution as a leader. So I'll leave it at that. Pass it on to Tony and be prepared for questions later.